To your battle stations, it's time for round 3, the semifinals of the Axis and Allies World Championship Tournament hosted at Gen Con in 2023. Let's make it hot. Welcome to Board Game Nation. My name is Gary Blevins, and I had the pleasure of teaming up with Doug Thorpe to compete in the very first Axis and Allies World Championship event at Gen Con in 2023, sponsored by Renegade Games. So far, we've released the play-by-play videos for rounds 1 and 2, and the audience response has been overwhelming. Both videos have been wildly popular, and we are deeply grateful to everyone that has watched them, shared their thoughts, and subscribed to the channel. We are also thrilled to report that Board Game Nation now has over 10,000 subscribers. Thank you to everyone that supported the channel as we've learned and grown. We can't wait to bring you more content like this and so much more. We also want to thank everyone that joined us for our first 2 live streams. They've been a ton of fun, and I hope that you'll join us for our next online adventure. If you can't participate live, that's okay. They'll also be available as videos on the channel. Now, in the interest of keeping the play-by-plays videos a reasonable length, we'll be saving some of the more in-depth strategy discussions for the live stream. You might notice a little graphic like this that pops up at different times in the video. This will be there to let you know that if you're interested in learning more about that particular moment, we're planning to talk more about it during the live stream. We also want to thank our friends at Renegade Game Studios for helping to make all of this possible by sponsoring the entire video series. Renegade is the current publisher of Axis and Allies, but they also have loads of other great games that I look forward to sharing with you throughout the series. To learn more about everything Renegade has to offer, you can visit your friendly local game store or use the link in the description below. Now it's time for the Choose Your Own Adventure portion of the show. Please hang out for a second as our menu options have recently changed. If you've watched the video for round 1, thank you very much. Please jump to this time code and enjoy. If you've only watched round 2, again, thank you very much, right this way. If you're brand new here, please stay where you are. We have some information that'll help make the rest of this video make more sense for you. The Axis and Allies World Championship Tournament is a single elimination tournament with 4 rounds of play. Over the course of those rounds, Doug and I took notes on the action and snapped pictures of all the games that we played and some that we didn't. So over the past few weeks, using our notes and pictures from the event, I've reconstructed those games here in the studio and taken much more detailed pictures. Now, using those pictures, Doug and I are going to walk you through a game from each of the 4 rounds leading up to an incredible final match. Our hope is that you'll be able to follow the action of the games as we move through them, and with any luck, you'll get a sense of what it was like to be at the table. We really want to get this right, so please let us know what you think in the comments below. And while you're down there, go ahead and subscribe and hit the bell so that when the next games are ready, you'll get a notification. A quick disclaimer. I did my best to recreate the games as accurately as possible, but things happen in the heat of a game and during the recreation process that may have caused some minor details to get lost in translation. Still, I'm confident that any minor discrepancies wouldn't have made any significant difference to the outcome of any of the games we're going to talk about. Also, in the pictures, you're going to see the different colored chips offset like this. This was done intentionally to make it easier to see. In reality, they stack just fine. With some minor variations, casual play and online play have basically the same rules. Because tournaments have lots of players and a limited amount of time, the rules for tournament play have some significant differences. Now, if you're already familiar with those differences, you can jump ahead to this part of the video and get into the game. If not, stay right here for a quick overview. The 2023 World Championship for Axis and Allies was determined over the 1942 2nd Edition board. There are 3 big rules differences that you need to know. Number 1, players bid for sides. Rather than a random draw, if both teams wish to play the same side, they'll start a bidding process that, when completed, may allow the players accepting a bid to place additional units on the map prior to the start of the game. A good bid and the placement of those units can make a huge difference in a game. A while back, we made a video that lays out all of the rules for bidding. If you want to know more about that, you can follow this link right here. Number 2. In tournament play, the Larry Harris Gen Con 3.0 setup is used. The 3.0 setup adds some UK units and relocates or removes some German units to create a better gameplay experience. We also made a video about that. Here's that link. Lastly, and most importantly, number 3. Tournament games have a very specific time limit and win conditions. In the case of 1942.2, the game ends after 5 hours of play. If a side has achieved a standard victory in the time allowed, that's plus 3 victory cities from what they started with, they win. If that hasn't happened as the time expires, the team with the most victory cities is declared the victor. So, as you can imagine, that changes the strategies quite a bit. Now, that isn't to say that tournament strategies won't work in casual or online play, but their target is a bit different. The time limit shifts the goal to controlling more victory cities than your opponent when the time expires, rather than trying to hold 9 or 10 victory cities. In 1942.2, that means controlling 7 or more when the clock runs out. This rule set lends itself to much more aggressive strategies and can be a ton of fun. Just keep these differences in mind as you follow along with the action. In the play-by-play video for round 1, Doug and I talked about an allied strategy that I named the Thorpe Thump. Now it's going to be important in this video, so here are the cliff notes. The Thorpe Thump is an allied strategy for Axis and Allies 1942 2nd edition that is commonly thought of as a kill Japan first strategy. It uses the stronger US and UK economies to overload the Pacific with sea and air units. The goal is to make it impossible for Japan to defend their 3 victory cities. However, the strategy also leaves the Germans completely unchecked. As you'll see in today's video, it can definitely be a bit of a high wire act. Now that you've got all that, let's jump into round 3, the semifinals of the 2023 World Championship for Axis and Allies. All right, friends, welcome back. The one, the only Doug Thorpe.
It's good to be here, Gary. Thanks for having me again.
You bet, man. Game 3, we were up against Donnie and Ian, both accomplished players that we have seen at tournaments before, and also really nice guys and really fun to play with. And part of the thing that I think makes them fun is that they're really pretty good players. So I think you'll see that as this game goes on, that they put up a really good games.
Yeah, let's jump in. I'm excited about it.
So it was round 3. Of course, we're using the Larry Harris setup. When we got into this was weird. This is worth talking about here because this was unusual. This was the first time I have had a bid go the other way. So we went back and forth for, I don't know, maybe 2 rounds of bidding, and then we gave them the Axis +3. And it was pretty strange because in every tournament that I've played in 1942 2nd edition, it has always been a bid to the Allies, like a plus to the Allies to get the game balanced. This was the first time that it actually went the other direction. What do you think about that, Doug?
Same for me. I have never been in a game where the bid went to the Axis. I actually heard, just by talking with other players in different parts of the bracket, that more than one game set a bid to the Axis, which just really surprised me.
It was an interesting question because now most of us have never done it before. So where do you put a bid for the Axis? So it was not something that most of us have really thought about before. But in the end, they decided to land an extra infantry in Belarusia. I might have put it in Ukraine, maybe Manila. Another infantry in Manila can make a big difference if you're trying to, save that victory city at the end of the game. We call that foreshadowing.
One other possibility is Libya, if you want to hit Egypt.
So right into it then, Russia won. Once again, I prefer the fighter purchase here, so we went with 4 infantry and a fighter, saving 2 IPCs. Then we get into our combat moves. We played a pretty standard 9-12 attack into West Russia and Ukraine, and got some pretty good dice. This was a monster win. We went into West Russia, did not lose any units, and we went into Ukraine and only lost 2 infantry. Between both battles, we lose 6 IPCs worth of material, and the Germans lost 60.
I can't say that I've ever seen Russia 1 go this well for the Allies.
Yeah, me neither. It certainly has never done that for me before. So I guess you're at the World Championship, so if you're going to get lucky like this, I guess this is the time. So after the outcomes, we kind of end with a pretty strong position. We had actually talked about moving the AA gun forward out of Caucasus into Ukraine to make it even more difficult to try to take back later, but I think we opted not to do that. We did, however, stack Yakut with 7 infantry, and we moved the fighter to Archangel to give us an angle on Buryatia if we wanted it, or on C-Zone 5. Remaining fighter goes back to Caucasus, and the AA gun moves forward. The guy from Kazakh moves into Szechuan, and the guy from Novosibirsk steps back into Moscow. And of course, the sub joins the fleet in C-Zone 7. All pretty standard stuff. We mobilized our new units. We put 3 infantry and the fighter into Caucasus and the 4th infantry into Moscow. This is what it looks like after that's all put together. So in the end, Russia collects 28 IPCs. We save 2, leaves us with 30 IPCs at the end of Russia 1. Into Germany 1, they've got a couple of things that they are going to need to take care of pretty quickly. They decided to start with a purchase of 7 infantry and 2 fighters. I like this purchase. This is kind of the gray skies that I used in game 2, or a version of it anyway. And this saves no IPCs. They step forward into Karelia out of the Baltic states to take their first victory city. Then they went at Ukraine in a way that I've never seen before. They moved with 7 infantry from the land and the tank from Bulgaria, as well as 3 fighters, and that all made sense to me. But then they used the transport to pick up the guys in Libya. and move them into 16 and drop them off into the fight. This I thought was an interesting choice, particularly because the battleship went someplace else. So this means the transport's going to be disposable at the end of the turn.
I didn't love this choice on their part. I haven't seen it before, but to me, to vacate North Africa and to basically sacrifice the transport in round one is not a good idea.
Yeah, it certainly takes away a lot of options. So out into the Atlantic, other than moving the battleship into 13 to attack that cruiser, this is the sequence that I'd like for Germany's first Atlantic move. It's 2 subs, the cruiser, 2 fighters into 7, and then 1 sub after the destroyer and the 2 transports in C Zone 11. You're not a huge favorite to win in that. I think you're like a 32% to get it all, but it's certainly worth the gamble because it's 22 IPCs versus 6. So I love that move. And you still have really good odds here in C Zone 7.
It's a really good move, and when I'm the Allies, I hate it. I feel like when I'm America, I don't roll well in that battle. Maybe that's just because it sticks with me when I lose all of that material with the US, but it seems like I always lose all that material with the US.
Here's how it went. Our combat outcomes, of course, they take Karelia with no problem. We did have some success in Ukraine. They started with 8 infantry in that battle, and they're only leaving with 4. So I feel kind of good about that. This was a very swingy turn. So let's start up at the top. In C Zone 7, back and forth, back and forth. It ends with the subs surviving because the only thing that's left is 1 fighter for the Germans. So they lost the fighter, the cruiser, and both subs in that fight, but they got everything except for the Russian sub. In C Zone 11, they got everything. So the Americans lost the destroyer and the 2 transports that are over there. This is going to be a hurdle later for the Americans in the Thorpe Thump, but we'll see more about that in a minute. And then the really improbable happened in 13, where the cruiser takes out the battleship and they both die. So the battleship and the cruiser were both destroyed in that battle. So this was a really swingy outcome. All right, so when we total up all the losses, this was a bloody one. The Axis lose 66 IPCs worth of material in this round, and the Allies lose 94.
Yeah, losing that material with America is pretty rough. The destroyer and the 2 transports are really significant, so that really hurts a lot.
So in non-combat, he lands the remaining fighter from C Zone 7 over in Finland, and then really consolidated everything into Poland, and really seemed like he wanted to lock up the center of Europe. He marched the guys over in North Africa, and he did leave a couple of guys in an AA gun in France. But that's what he left us with. This made it pretty clear to me that he was going after Russia here, and that we weren't going to need to worry about London very much. If you're Germany and you're blowing off both your available transports that you started with at the beginning of the game, the UK is probably not going to have a problem this game. They got their 7 infantry and 2 fighters into Germany, and they collected 41 IPCs.
Coming into UK1, we're in a similar position to our prior game. We end up going with the same build. We use the 2 bomber and the sub with the idea of going after C Zone 37 again. We want to wipe out as much of the Japanese fleet as we can. We do the same thing. Even though we didn't have the sub bid this time, we still felt like it was worth trying to get the Japanese Navy out of there. We send the bomber after the transport in the Baltic Sea, and then we send the destroyer after the transport in the Black Sea, which is something that I'm not sure, given how things progress, if that was the best idea there. I think maybe we should have let Russia take care of that transport.
I think that certainly would have been another option. The other thing we could have done was just ignore it, right? Yeah. Because we're attacking the guys in Libya with the guys from Egypt. We're favored in that battle. So the worst he can do is he could bring the infantry and the artillery from Bulgaria and use it to attack Caucasus, but that seems unlikely. We probably could have just ignored it, because I think the destroyer probably had better uses later, but this is what we did. Yeah. And this had a really strange outcome. Of course, we were successful in cleaning up in the Atlantic, but this had a very unusual outcome in 37. I can't even really figure out what the odds of this are because we retreated at a particular moment, so it's a little difficult to calculate. But we got to a point in this combat sequence where they had 2 fighters left, but they had lost the carrier. And we had a carrier and a fighter left over, so we opted to retreat, but we retreated to 38 instead of back to 35.
This was a tough one. 64% chance you expect to win it or at least wipe out everything but 1 unit. Having the 2 fighters left really comes back to haunt us later in this game. And it would have been really nice to at least get one of those. We got Borneo, which was great, but we weren't able to get New Guinea, which was a little bit frustrating. So to lose really two of those three battles when we had 75%, 75%, 64% chances was tough out of the gate. Pile that on top of the U.S. East Coast fleet getting lost. Not a great start to the strat for game two.
The hits just keep on coming.
British economy's looking pretty good right now.
Yes. For non-combat, we moved the destroyer and the transport. I guess we left the tank behind?
I wonder if that was a mistake on our part, because I can't think of a reason we would have left that tank there.
Yeah, I think we made a mistake here and left the tank behind. We land the bomber in Kazakh and leave the fighters in London. We move the guy from Burma into Yunnan. We march from Transjordan to Persia, from Persia to India. We march up north through the Belgian Congo. So that is all of our non-combat moves. Once we mobilize our two bombers and the sub in 35, we're back to being able to project a fair amount of power in the Pacific with three bombers and a fighter and a sub. That's not as strong as we like to be, but it's certainly pretty potent.
Yeah, this round didn't go quite like we had hoped or planned, but we're trying to make do. We put ourselves in a position that, again, if they want to try to chase all of our stuff, they'll have to hopefully put themselves out of position. Not quite where we wanted it to be, though.
Looking at Japan 1, they've got a couple of fighters that they didn't expect to have, which I guess is nice for them. They decide to use those fighters to facilitate a couple of carriers in their opening purchase. This is the first time I've seen the two carrier purchase. I thought this was an interesting choice, and it saves two IPCs.
Yeah, this is where not getting at least one of those fighters off the East Indies is brutal, because they're able to do this build. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to do this. And so this is going to set us back.
So for combat moves, they used both transports to move two infantry and an artillery and a tank into Buryatia. They moved into Anhui. They moved with 7 infantry and the fighter. Moving south, they made a pretty good push into Yunnan with 3 infantry and 2 artillery and then 1 fighter that came up from French Indochina, Thailand. Again, chose not to take Burma, which I thought was, again, an unusual choice. Wisely, though, stayed out of Szechuan. Down in the South Pacific, they decided to leave the carrier and the fighter alone in C-Zone 38, and instead they sent their destroyer from 61 down into 35 to try to pick off our brand new shiny submarine. And of course, they used a couple of fighters to pick off the guys, the transports in 47 and 49. And the fact that they kept New Guinea allowed for the fighter from East Indies to pick off the transport in 49 and land in New Guinea. Otherwise, that would have been a bit trickier for them because they went for the full Pearl Harbor attack. So they came at it with both fighters that can get there and the bomber. That necessitates the entry of the carrier into the fight, as well as the cruiser and the sub. And here's how it went. So, of course, they take Buryatia with no problem. They take Anhui, but they did lose one of the guys that were there. They took Yunnan. I think they lost 1 infantry there. And, of course, they are successful in taking out the transports, but unfortunately they also took our sub in 35. And the battle in Pearl in C-Zone 53 went just about mathematically right. They're, of course, favored in that fight because they've got a lot more units, a lot more firepower there. They end with a fighter and a bomber remaining. The good news is we did get one of their fighters, and they traded off their carrier for it. So this is kind of a good news, bad news. We lost a carrier, which is really important in the Pacific, but they lost one and another fighter and several other C units that I think they're going to miss later.
Again, America's getting some setbacks. The Allies are getting behind from the beginning. As much as I didn't want this outcome, I think it was a good idea. They got us in C-Zone 11, the American transports and destroyer there, so taking out our Pearl Harbor fleet is pretty key to slow us down, and it was effective. They got us.
It certainly was. Total losses. This one hurt. The Japanese lost 48 IPCs this time, and the Allies lost 76. Trombones leading the big parade in J1. For non-combat, they got a fighter into 62, 2 into 60. Those will be caught by the 2 new carriers coming in. They landed in Wake Island. Fighter, of course, landed in New Guinea. And this is where they are at the end of their non-combat. It's a pretty good spot if you're Japan. particularly after you start mobilizing your units and you put your 2 new carriers down and you put the fighters on them. So in the end, they collected 29 IPCs this time. They're up 3 from Buryatia, Anhui, and Yunnan, but they're down 4 for Borneo. They had saved 2 IPCs in their previous build, so they end the turn with 31. Moving into US 1, it's looking a little sparse for the old American team, and I know that the objective of the Thorpe Thump is to swarm the Pacific and go after Manila and Shanghai. But I will say at this point, I wondered about holding that course. I wondered because we had such a big round for the Russians in the first turn, and the Germans had lost a fighter in C-Zone 7. We'd had really good success in Ukraine. They've given up North Africa, and the American Navy is down to 3 ships. It has a transport, a battleship, and a destroyer. That's all they've got.
4 ships, a cruiser off of Panama Canal.
Oh, and the cruiser. You're right. The cruiser off 19. Excuse me. So I will say that I was hesitant to move forward with the Thorpe Thump here, and I'm curious if you can talk about why you still saw that as the right path here.
That's a hard question to answer. The strategy is pretty effective, and I've seen that in a lot of situations. So there's just the history of it. One of the keys that any game is going to come down to is the number of land units that Japan puts into Asia. And by doing the 2 carrier build, they weren't enabling themselves to put more land units in Asia. They built 2 carriers. They didn't build an extra transport. They didn't build any more land units. So what I'm thinking is if we can bring the American economy and forces to bear on them, they're eventually just going to run out of land units, 1. 2, because Russia is doing well, maybe they can spare a little bit to help with the push in Asia, which is pretty key. And the fact that the British carrier did survive is significant because, again, we're trying to match them carrier for carrier as best we can. So all of those things, and actually the capture of Borneo, I don't want to forget to mention that. The fact that Japan's economy is down is further evidence that they're not going to be able to keep up with the United States for very long because they're not pushing into Asia. They're not going to get more territory. So that's kind of what made me think we should stay the course.
Well, it's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see how it played out for them. We bought 2 carriers in the fighter. Again, the signature of the Thorpe Thump, and it saves 4 IPCs. We did not have any combat moves in this particular round, mostly because we didn't have very many units. So we just went into our non-combat moves. We started marching towards the Pacific. We moved the fighter around from Szechuan into India with the 2 guys back to Kazakh. That leaves the Russians the ability to step forward and take Kwangtung. Moved everything into 56 so that we will end the non-combat phase with 3 fighters and the cruiser that came in from 19 to join the battleship, the destroyer, and the transport that are there. Once we mobilize, you end up with 2 carriers with that have fighters on them and a bomber there. So it's starting to look a little healthier in the Pacific. In the end, we collected 40 IPCs this time. We're down 2 from Anhui and Yunnan and up nothing, but we had saved 4 IPCs from the previous round, so we end the turn with 44 IPCs. Have you ever wondered what bored warehouse robots do when the lights go out? Well, my curious friends, let me show you. They play Robo Rally, racing through a factory floor filled with conveyor belts, lasers, pits, and more. Designed by Richard Garfield, Robo Rally is a competitive racing game for 2 to 6 players ages 12 and up and plays in about 90 minutes. The game has recently been re-released by Renegade Game Studios after being given a serious upgrade. Robo Rally combines strategy with some fun robotic mayhem to create a fast-paced racing game. Players program their robots' movements simultaneously, building their own paths to the finish line. The catch? The other racers and the factory's hazards may have plans of their own, leading to unexpected crashes, laser burns, pitfalls, and general mayhem. I found Robo Rally fun and easy to learn, but with an interesting depth that lies in the mastering of the art of planning and anticipation. Renegade has taken a timeless classic that has earned its place among the greats in the board gaming world and given it a brand new engine. So, get ready to plan, race, and laugh your way through the mechanical madness of Robo Rally. To get your copy of Robo Rally, visit your local game store or follow the description in the link below. And round 1, what do you think?
I don't like how it looks. There's some opportunities, lack of a second wave of land units coming into Asia, and nobody extra put into Manila. So we still have opportunities, but things are pretty thin for the Allies at the end of round one.
Total IPC losses in the first round. The Axis lost 232. The Allies lose 230. If you've kept track at home at all, you'll know that the Axis start with a great deal more material. So an even trade here is actually better for the Axis than it is for the Allies.
Yeah, it's bad for the Allies. You can't make even trades like that.
Yeah, but even worse is the Victory City tally has now switched. It starts with the Allies with 7, the Axis with 6. The Axis have now taken the lead with 7-6. So at the end of round one, they are in the lead. So we got to turn it around. The Russians decide to purchase 8 infantry and the tank. The tank is there hopefully to assist with the taking of Shanghai. Our combat moves, we are moving into Belarusia, we're moving into Karelia, we're moving into Kwangtung. We're making a big push into Ukraine. Our intent isn't to take it, it's really just to thin out the guys that are there. You'll also notice that the tank that's in West Russia is not involved in combat. It'll be moving during non-combat later.
I don't love the attack into Belarusia this round.
We, of course, took Kwangtung with no problem. We got into Karelia and did not lose any units, which I thought was nice. However, in Belarusia, we couldn't hit a damn thing and lost all of our units, and the guy in Belarusia just stood there and laughed at us. And then in Ukraine, we had similar luck. We swung, I believe, with 7 infantry and 3 fighters, missed everything. He hits 3 infantry, and we decide that that's enough of that, and we pull out and land in Caucasus. Seems like the worm had turned a bit. In this round, the Axis lose only 3 IPCs, which is, a lot less than the 16 that the Allies lost. So we were hoping now at this point to go back to the even trading because that is not happening anymore. We were not confident enough that we could hold Caucasus, so we brought the fighters back to Moscow because he can get to Caucasus now with 4 infantry, whole giant stack of tanks, and several air units. So we decided to pull everything back into Moscow and hope to counterpunch in subsequent turns. And the sub from C-Zone 7 moves down to 13 to kind of patrol the Atlantic because there's still that sub that's out there. That, by the way, is the beginning of one of my favorite naval battles of all time. More on that later. Watch this fight.
It's good. It's a classic.
It is a classic. I love it. So we mobilize our units. We land 7 infantry and the tank into Moscow, and then the remaining guy into Caucasus. And in the end, the Russians collected 27 IPCs this time. On to Germany 2. This is kind of what they're looking at. They've got 5. We've got 5 infantry in Caucasus, and they can get there with a ton of stuff. They decide to make what I think is maybe a slightly over a conservative purchase. I probably would have gone for a bomber here, maybe a bomber and a fighter, because they're kind of on the move. But they opted instead for another large infantry purchase with 9 infantry and artillery and then 1 fighter. For combat moves, they made a light push into West Russia and a medium-sized push into Karelia. They should be able to take both of these without any problem. They sent 1 fighter after the destroyer and the transport in C-Zone 7. The Russians, they're just chilling in 13, and the Germans decide that they're going to come into attack, and we wisely just submerge at the beginning of combat, right? It's step 2, we can submerge. So we submerge, and we let them just go off and be bullies, kids these days. So those are all the combat moves for the Germans, and they are successful in all of them. They took no losses in Leningrad. They did lose 1 guy taking West Russia. They lost the fighter to the destroyer in C-Zone 7, leaving that transport still kind of hanging out there by itself.
Attacking these random destroyers with airplanes and losing them, not a good idea unless it's really key and significant.
Total losses in the German combat, the Axis lose 13, including that fighter, while the Allies continue to get hammered, losing a total of 21 IPCs. So for non-combat, consolidate everything in Belarusia. So they've got 10 tanks, now in Belarusia with 6 infantry and 5 fighters. They mobilized their new units. That's everybody into Germany with 1 guy into Italy. Once everything's mobilized, they've got a pretty good line of guys heading east. This is a really popular strategy for the Germans here. You're basically just building a moving wall, right? So you've got a big stack of infantry, and that usually has the tanks and the fighters in it, and then immediately behind that is another stack of infantry. Behind that is another stack of infantry. It's kind of, I've referred to it before as ants marching because they kind of look like ants on the board. So you end up with just this big column of infantry and with a mix of offensive units here. The trouble is the tanks, once they really only get to punch once because they're going to punch and then they're going to be stuck. So you kind of end up having to wait for that knockout punch. They can't really punch anything altogether anyway until you get to Moscow.
This is scary for the Allies right now. The numbers are not going our way in units lost in battles, and there's a lot of German stuff bearing down on Russia, and it's not gone well in the Pacific in round one for the US and the UK.
Yeah, it's looking a little thin. So Germany collects 42 IPCs. Moving into UK2, again, there's not a ton of material on the board here, and the Japanese Navy is pretty well put together. So it would be very difficult to make any kind of big push at them on this particular turn. I'm sure you sat down and did the math. Did you look at how that might play out?
I did. It's a stretch to go after their battleship and carrier. And to me, it just wasn't worth it because if that battle goes sideways, then the Allies could be in a lot of trouble. So to me, it's better to build up. If you keep putting pressure on with the UK and with the US, Japan can't keep up. So let's not do anything stupid. Don't act too quickly. Let's get some more bombers in the air and let's keep putting pressure on them.
And that's what we did. So we bought 2 bombers and a fighter in this turn and saved 3 IPCs. Combat moves, we sent the carrier and the fighter that were on it and all the bombers that we had at the Poor Destroyer in 35. Before that transport gets destroyed by something, the only safe place for it to be on the board, or the safest place, I should say, was in C-Zone 3. So we grabbed the guy and a tank off of the UK and landed in Norway. Of course, we were successful in taking Norway and beginning to threaten Finland. And we lost the fighter. Speaking of going after destroyers, we lost the fighter in this particular battle, which was not great for us. Total losses, the Axis lose 8 and the Allies lose 10. Again, this is not great math if you're an Allied player.
Our attack on their destroyer was a little bit different. I mean, the other option is we let that destroyer chase our aircraft carrier around the board. Yeah, we could defend well against it, but if it hits us, we're either losing that fighter or the carrier, and potentially the fighter also if there's no place for the fighter to land. So again, obviously not ideal, but it's a little bit different in my opinion than the attack on the British destroyer out in C-Zone 7 earlier.
I think we had a good reason to attack that destroyer. It just, destroyers seem to be on fire.
Except my US destroyer from round 1.
Right. The infantry from Western Canada walks over to Eastern Canada to join the tank that got left behind in round 1. But we made an interesting choice here. Because there was 0 pressure coming at London, we brought the fighters down and landed them in French West Africa. From there, in subsequent turns, they can make it to C-Zone 35 to land on the carrier. Because we seem to keep losing our fighters in the South Pacific, so we're trying to import some additional ones. We decided to give up on Libya. We sent the tank back over to Transjordan and marched up to Anglo-Egyptian Sudan. The destroyer came down from 16 to 17 and hopefully start to make its way into the Indian Ocean. We mobilized the 2 bombers and the fighter into C-Zone 35 and then, of course, into India. And this is kind of how we ended the turn. The UK collects 38 IPCs. We had saved 3. And that leaves us with a total of 41, which is good. There are some things going for the Allies at this point, but not a lot.
Yeah, the 5 UK bombers in India is pretty significant. Again, it gives us the ability to project some force and really prevent Japan from doing too much. I mean, they can still do a lot. They're not landlocked or totally hemmed in, but the pressure's starting to mount on Japan really quickly. So I also think that pressure results in them continuing to feel like they need to build Navy in order to protect the Navy that they have.
So moving into Japan too, we're looking at what their options are. It's worth noting here that the guy is still in Malala. So they did not move the guy forward into French Indochina, Thailand. Remember that guy. Looking at their options here, I will tell you, if I were Japan, I would land heavy in Burma this turn.
I don't know. That would have been really interesting. It'd be interesting to see what the numbers look on those different options stat-wise.
Japan instead buys a carrier, a sub, and a fighter this time. And they do a quick up and back to take the Soviet Far East. And they step forward and take Sinkiang and Sichuan for free. They also move down and make a big show of taking Kwangtung to eliminate the last Russian guy down there. And of course, they were successful in all of those battles. They lost 1 infantry in Kwangtung. Both sides lose 3. Again, even trades in this particular instance are bad for the Allies, good for the Axis. So this is, again, another really good round for the Japanese. So their first non-combat move was to move the guy forward out of Malala into French Indochina, Thailand. And then they moved their fighters around. They landed the bomber in Kiangsu. And yes, the bombers are in India. And I sat there and watched them count it out, they did not believe that there was a way to attack the bomber in Kiangsu and then also safely land. The fighter can get there, but I think they believed that in order to do that, you'd have to bring that carrier up. If it meant that they had to trade the carrier for the bomber, then they were willing to make that trade. But they didn't see that there might be a place for the bombers to land.
They didn't take more land units into Asia. If you counted at the beginning of this round, they had 14. We got 1. They're down to 13. The numbers are going to start going south for them, and it's going to be a problem for them long term.
You'll notice that the transports, again, just like you said a moment ago, they did not move anything onto land. Instead, they moved into C-Zone 60. I'm not sure what they plan to do there. Maybe they're on subsequent turns planning to pop out to pick up the guys that are on Okinawa or Iwo Jima. Maybe. Not sure. So those were all their non-combat moves. Then they made one more non-combat move. That guy from French Indochina, Thailand moved to Yunnan. I should say, this is the kind of thing that happens when you're playing at speed or when you're just playing on the tabletop. So like errors like this are going to happen from time to time. It's not that big of a deal, but that guy did move twice. And let me be really clear. I don't believe it was intentional in any way. I think it was just the kind of thing that just happens when you have live pieces on the board. It's not that big of a deal, but it's the kind of thing that if it's happening on your home games on Saturday afternoon, well, it happens at the World Championships too. So don't feel that bad about it. Try to avoid it if you can, but it does happen.
Yeah, you usually move that guy up. And so you're used to him being there in round 2, and you move him up again. So one guy probably moved him up early in non-combat, and then the other guy's looking around and sees the guy in French Indochina. He's always in French Indochina in round 2, so he moves him up again. No ill intent there for sure.
At the end of Japan's turn, they collect 32 IPCs. They saved 1 from the previous turn, so they end with 33 IPCs this turn. On to US 2. That's a big navy in C-Zone 60, so I think we're probably going to try to stay away from it for the moment.
It's a big navy, and we need more navy. Because we lost our transports off of the East Coast, we have to build more of those as well.
Right, because we only have the 1, and then we've got guys to fill that transport.
Yeah, we moved our land troops from the East Coast across, so we don't need a bunch of additional land units at this point, but we have to be able to bring in more land units on the ground to take territory. And if our target is Japan, which it is, we're going after Manila, Shanghai, maybe Tokyo, we have to get more transports rolling for us.
And that's what we did. So we bought another carrier, we bought a fighter, 2 transports, and a sub to get us feeling a little stronger about making a push out into the Pacific. US 2's combat this turn is to swing down and pick up the Solomon Islands. It's only defended by 1 guy, and we can get there with the battleship, a cruiser, and 3 fighters, along with the guy and the tank. I wonder if you can talk us through what your thinking was here.
Yeah, given the state of the board, you need to take the Solomon Islands in order to eliminate it as a landing zone for Japan. Japan is in a situation where they can stage fighters in Manila, and if they have fighters in Manila, they can hit this C zone here, 44, with those fighters if you have unprotected transport. So you're bringing your transports down from the West Coast to 44 and then across, and you're going to have to constantly monitor that C zone and protect it. But if you take the Solomon Islands, it just eliminates the possibility of them landing air units there. So it's significant strategically at this point in the game.
So it doesn't seem like it's particularly relevant at the moment, but later on when Manila becomes occupied by fighters, if the Solomon's not there, then they can't reach.
So as Gary pointed out, Japan thought their bomber would be safe, but we had other ideas. The Americans are going to move into Singkang in order to create a landing spot for the UK bombers so that the United Kingdom doesn't have to put their carrier at threat and bring the carrier up in order to hit that bomber. So Moving into Sinkang, bringing the fighter up from India. We're just building an airport. We're building a landing strip for UK bombers at this point. Easy thing to miss, but we wanted to be sure we captured it so that we could take out their bomber and not have to worry about it later in the game.
So outcomes, the Solomon Islands fell without taking anybody with it, which is nice because those American land units are pretty precious. So we're grateful that they missed in that particular round. Same thing happened in Sinkang. Finished that combat with both of the Americans still standing there and the fighter. US-2's combat starting to turn a little bit better for the Allies here. The Axis lose 6 IPCs and the Allies lose 0. Not big, but at least it's moving in the right direction. For non-combat, that fighter makes it back into Kazakh. The American bomber swings all the way down to Borneo, and this feels a little bit like a trap. I like this move simply because if the Japanese want to go after it, they're going to put a big chunk of their fleet at risk to pull it off. So I think this is one of those trickety traps. Am I reading that right?
It's a trap. It's definitely a trap.
But it also gets that bomber in a good position.
Having Borneo is great. It's worth a lot of money, and now we can attack the Philippine Islands with whatever air units that we can put in Borneo. So huge strategic position there for us.
Wrapping up the American non-combat, we bring the carriers down to pick up the 3 fighters coming out of the Solomons. We leave the 4th fighter that we had in 56 to be caught by the incoming American carrier. On the other side of the world, we marched the last 2 guys over to San Francisco. And we mobilized the new carrier with the fighter, the 2 transports, and the extra sub. And then, of course, the carrier with both fighters in 56. And then down in 44, there's 2 carriers there with 3 fighters. Starting to look a little healthier out in the Pacific as the U.S. finishes its turn collecting 39 IPCs. As we end round 2, we take a look around the board, and it has still not been a great round for the Allies, but it's starting to look a little bit better. Not so much in the European theater, but certainly in the Pacific theater. We're starting to get some transports on the board. We're starting to get some land units moving and starting to threaten some critical victory cities, and the Japanese are going to have to respond. The 5 bombers in India is not insignificant for sure. Plus, looks like we're probably going to be able to pick off that Japanese bomber on the UK's turn this round. We still got the 2 fighters hanging out in French West Africa. They can double back to London if there's an urgent need for them to do that, but they're more than likely going to head over to India. This is a scary column coming at the Russians, and they've got a pretty good hold on Karelia at this point.
Yeah, things are looking a little bit better for the Allies in the Pacific. As an Allied player in this situation, you still don't like the fact that you're at parity with Japanese carriers and fighters. You want to have at least 1 more than them. But again, the first rounds didn't go that direction, so this is where we're at. We're still pressing forward with the strategy.
We started to see a little bit of movement in the IPC count, but in the wrong direction. The Axis lost 30 IPCs this round, and the Allies lost another 50 IPCs worth of material. So that's, not ideal. And of course, that also means that the victory tally is still the same. The Axis are still holding 7, the Allies are holding 6. So as we move into Russia 3, it is time to get a little bit more power on the board here. So we opt for 7 infantry and another tank. For combat moves, we take a light push into Ukraine and another into West Russia. We decide not to attack the German sub this particular time. Those are our combat moves this turn. And they went very well. So we were able to take West Russia and Ukraine, and we took no casualties in that particular round. The Axis lose 6 IPCs. That's the 2 guys, the one in West Russia, the one in Ukraine. And the Allies lose 0. So you're going to like that. For non-combat, we brought those fighters back to Russia, and we decided to start to step the infantries back from Yakut. So we left 1 there so that the tank couldn't blitz through, but we moved 6 infantry into Evenki with the fighter, which gives us the ability, should they decide to try to make some kind of crazy stab at Sinkang, to have the Russians come back with some force. Or if the Germans decide to make a really big push into Archangel, there's a healthy stack of comrades there ready to greet them. We also brought 2 infantry and the AA gun down into Kazakh to protect the American fighter that's there. Plus, Moscow at this point isn't in any danger. We moved the Russian sub over into 15 so that it can start making its way into the Pacific theater. We sent 1 of the tanks, hopefully on its way to raise the Russian flag, the hammer and sickle, in Shanghai when the time is right. So moving into Germany 3, they're feeling pretty good about themselves. They make another huge infantry purchase. This is 10 infantry and 2 tanks.
Yeah, 2 tanks and 3 fighters would have been better. I mean, heck, 5 extra tanks would have been better. Like, they can at least move 2 spaces and get somewhere, but this is too slow at this point in the game.
They just decided to make a few light trades in Archangel, and they take a pretty big step into Ukraine this time. They did finally pick off the transport, but you'll notice with the die there that it's used 3 moves to get there, which means that it's going to have to land in Finland, which is, okay with us because it puts us in range of some UK pieces. The German sub also played the role of the gentleman and stayed out in 13 and did not come after the Russian sub. They were successful in Archangel. They think they lose a guy or 2 there, and they lose 2 guys in the assault on Ukraine. Of course, they were successful in taking out the transport.
You keep fanning out as Russian, grabbing these buffer zones, and they keep like kind of chasing your men and grabbing them back. But at some point, they're really just like slowly, shedding off all of their men that they've been building up all game long are getting destroyed, and that's what they need in order to make a final tank and airplane push.
So I think they may have channeled what you just said. They shifted their line to a full northerly line. They did move a couple of infantry back to try to defend the fighter in Finland, which is good for us because it draws, a couple of guys away from Moscow later on. They mobilized the 10 infantry into Germany and the 2 tanks into Karelia. That makes for a pretty scary stack of 12 tanks hanging out there in Leningrad. Germany finishes the turn collecting 39 IPCs. UK3, what do you think?
The United Kingdom needs to figure out a way to get in this game in the Pacific, get some pressure on Japan, and make some things happen. This was a tough build, if I remember correctly, deciding what to actually put on the board. Because we can only put out 3 units in India, but we have a lot of money, we want to do something that's going to be helpful, and so it was kind of tough to decide what exactly to put out here. We went with an infantry, armor, 2 fighters, and a bomber. Part of the idea is if we get some airplanes in the UK, there's enough time to get them into Asia and use them to help out in some way. So this is what we ended up building.
So for combat, 2 UK bombers coming in to take out their friend in Kiangsu.
I love me some free Japanese bombers.
That's right. And we were successful in taking it out without losing any units in return. So Japan loses 12 IPCs. The Allies lose 0 that particular turn. For non-combat, the destroyer comes down into 35. We did move 2 guys out and into Burma, creating landing zones moving towards the victory city in Kiangsu. We mobilize the infantry and the bomber into London, and the tank and 2 fighters into Calcutta. And once everything gets mobilized, this is kind of what we look like. And the UK still making the big bucks, raking it in at 38 IPCs.
We're in a situation now where we need to start moving quickly, so that's why we're buying a lot of air power. Not only are the airplanes good, but they can move far quickly. And yeah, we need to create those landing zones like you said, get some ground units on the board with the tank that we placed out there. And we're starting to get to a situation where we might need to start trading air power for land units in order to clear the path to Shanghai and get the victory city for the sake of the game.
Japan 3. They are looking pretty good, but if they're going to do something aggressive, they need to do it soon. They purchase 4 infantry and 2 fighters in this turn, saving 1 IPC. They make no combat moves. This surprised me a little bit. I would have expected something here to happen, but they opted to make no combat moves this turn. Instead, went right to non-combat. They leave 1 guy in Buryatia. They move the rest of the units down to Manchuria. They leave Anhui unoccupied, but instead start the process of stacking up Shanghai.
I think they're realizing at this point in the game the pressure that's on them and the need to protect their victory cities is why they didn't make any combat. So as surprising as it was, I kind of get where they're going with it. They realize their rounds are getting pretty limited at this point, and they need to make something happen to protect those victory cities, or we're just going to blow the doors off and walk right in.
Yeah, to that end, they sent the 2 transports down with 2 infantry and the AA gun to Manila to try to reinforce that, and then moved the rest of their fleet down to that same sea zone to defend the transports in hopes of being able to make another shuttle run. But it puts them in the middle of the American teeth. The math here gets pretty tricky pretty fast. At a glance here, you might only think that the 3 fighters from 44 are the only ones that can reach that sea zone, along with the bomber out of Borneo. But it's pretty easy to miss that the fighters in 56 and the fighter in Kazakh can all make it to that fight in 48.
I agree. I don't think they saw that as much air power as the U.S. could bring to bear on their Navy.
So they mobilized their 4 infantry and their 2 fighters into Tokyo. Japan ends the turn collecting 32 IPCs. They saved 1 again, and they end the turn with 33 IPCs. Moving into US 3, we decide, looking at the board here, that our best purchase was to buy another 3 bombers because, you know, you can never have too many bombers. But I wonder if you can walk us through our combat choices here.
We have to decide with America if it's go time right now or not. We need to decide, do we want to hit them now with the United States and then clean up with Britain? Or do we kind of stage one more round with the U.S., build ourselves up, and then allow Britain to take the first shot at the Japanese Navy? After deciding to get the 3 bombers, I thought it was best for the United States to take the attack first. The reason being, we don't want Japan to continue to shuck infantry units to their victory cities. So if we wait for Britain to go and attack the Navy first, then there'll probably be some Navy left and the transports, and it'll give them one more round of moving units. Whereas if America goes first, we weaken the Navy, maybe we obliterate the Navy, but ultimately we get to the transports by Britain's turn because they can send in the bombers and clean up whatever America doesn't get. So we decided to go for the attack, even though the odds were pretty even on the battle itself.
Well, before we look at that, we picked up Anhui and Szechuan for free. And these are all of the units that can make it into C-Zone 48 to attack the Japanese fleet. Notice here that we are not attacking Manila, so the transport is still in 44.
We need more land units to go into Manila. It's not the time yet. We want to continue to build up land units and bring in our West Coast fleet down, but we want to wipe out the Japanese Navy as soon as possible.
When we put them up on the battle strip, this is what they look like. It ends up with a battleship, a bomber, a cruiser, 6 fighters, and 2 carriers versus a battleship, 6 fighters, 1 destroyer, 3 aircraft carriers, and a submarine. So this is one of those battles where you'll be able to do some calculus sitting at the side of the table to be able to get a real feel for if you're favored, if this is the right move. But the thing to keep in mind here is that we don't have to win outright. We don't have to destroy everything here because there are a bunch of UK units that can come behind us. So what do you think the odds of success here are?
I think America has about a 45% chance of victory in this battle.
Not bad. 38% chance of winning the battle outright. The combat outcome, we retreat with 1 battleship that's damaged. They have 2 fighters remaining. Now their fighters are going to be able to land in Manila, which is okay. But our battleship is going to survive and be hanging out in C-Zone 49 by itself. This is now easy pickings for the British to be able to swing through with a single fighter and end the ability for the Japanese to continue to reinforce their victory cities, which was the entire objective here. Were you happy with how this turned out?
Really pleased with it. Again, our goal was to sacrifice the American Navy at this point in the game, wipe out the transports, and just take Japan's ability to reinforce their victory cities completely out of the game. Now, obviously, they can still build air units to get them there, but that's only going to get them so far at this point in the game, and so we had to kill those transports.
Moving on. Of course, we took Anhui and Szechuan with no problem. When we look at the total, how much sank to the bottom of the sea around the Philippines here, the Axis lost 116 IPCs worth of material here, and the Allies lost 120. Again, parity is not great, but in this instance, we had kind of squeaked into the lead here with material because the Allies were building with both the Americans and the UK. So you get to a place where you're slightly ahead, and that's when you can start trading. Non-combat, we bring the carrier group down to 44 from 56. Unfortunately, it doesn't have any fighters on it. In fact, I don't think the Americans have a single fighter left on the board at this point. The sub moves over from 56 into 59 in the event that they decide to try to build any naval units. In fact, now that I'm looking at it, I realize the Americans don't have a single air unit on the board, which is pretty unusual.
Very unusual, but they're about to.
Yes, reinforcements are on the way. They placed their 3 bombers. They're collecting 41 IPCs. They saved 3, ending the turn with 44 IPCs. This is where the capture of the Solomon Islands becomes really important because now there's 2 fighters in Manila. And the only transports that America has that have land units that can reach there are in 44. the Japanese would have been able to attack 44 and land in the Solomon Islands. So the fact that we have control of that space now is actually really, really critical. So as we get at the end of round 3 and we look around the board here, things are starting to turn for the Allies. Boy, that stack of German units in Karelia, though, is still a little bit scary.
Yeah, it's terrifying to me at this point in the game.
IPC losses. We're finally starting to get it going in the right direction.
Barely. I don't know that I've seen a game where the Allies have hemorrhaged this much money at this point in the past.
In the end, this is the only number that really matters. At this point, the Axis are still in the lead. They have 7 victory cities. The Allies only have 6.
You know, one thing that I should point out is there's those 2 fighters from the very first round of the game that we were never able to kill end up being very significant in the naval battle and land on the Philippine Islands.
Yes, they did. You should have rolled better. So the Russians into turn 4, looking at a very scary German stack or 3 in their vicinity. But they're also in a reasonable position to bolster the assault in the east. So it's going to be kind of a tricky balance here. We decided to buy 8 infantry with our 24 IPCs. We decided to make a couple of light pushes here. We made a light push into Archangel, 3 infantry and all the fighters, really just trying to create a buffer so that the tanks can't blitz through and cause us any problems, which essentially buys us another turn. Now that the Japanese fleet has sunk to the bottom of the Pacific, the Russians can turn their attention back to that German sub in 13. So they decide to go in there and attack. Combat outcomes, we were successful in Archangel. We picked off the 1 guy. I don't think we took any losses there. And the coward in 13 submerged.
Unbelievable.
I mean, he picked the fight. We turn around, we say, okay, let's go. He submerges. I don't get it. Whatevs. In the end, the Axis lost 3 IPCs and the Allies lost 0 in that particular round, which is a good sign, starting the round off right. For non-combat, the fighters landed in Szechuan. We moved the infantry from Yakut over to Avinki, and then the 4 infantry that were left in Avinki moved south to Singkang. So with the infantry and the AA gun that came from Kazakh moving into Szechuan with the tank from Singkang, there's a bit of a threat there for the Japanese. They've really got to start thinking about the Russians punching and then the British punching and then the Americans punching.
We're really starting to crank up the pressure, and Russia's helping in ways that you often don't see them help in.
We mobilized all 8 of our shiny new Russian infantry into Moscow. At the moment, we have 12 infantry there and 3 tanks and the AA gun, plus some pretty good buffer zones. In the end, the Russians have a pretty wide swath of power and influence, which is unusual at this stage in the game for Russia 4. They end the turn collecting 24 IPCs, turn it over to the Germans for their 4th turn. I think they're ready to make their big push. Let's find out. Their purchase kind of tells us that they are. They finally purchased those 3 bombers, which tells me that they're probably looking to attack Moscow on turn 5. And so does their combat move. They send all the guys from Ukraine and their fighters to clear up West Russia, and then the big stack into Archangel, which puts an enormous amount of pressure on Moscow. And they finally remembered to step over into Tripoli and take Libya. And then those cowards attacked us again. This German sub, he continues to harass the Russian sub. He attacks him again.
Sneak attack. Dirty.
Combat outcomes, they took down the guy in Archangel. They took out the guy in West Russia. No surprises there. They liberated Libya. And of course, like the smart players that we are, we submerged the Russian submarine and avoid the conflict entirely. There's no need for this kind of harassment. The combat losses, the Germans lost 3 IPCs, the Russians lost 12, which is not what you are hoping to see.
It would have been nice to hit a few more guys coming into those territories with the Russians.
It certainly would have. But for non-combat move, they get all their fighters together in Karelia. That's 6 for those of you keeping track at home right now. And move the ants closer to Moscow. So now they've mobilized their 3 bombers into Berlin. They end the turn collecting 40 IPCs. They save the 3, so they end with 43 IPCs. And turn it over to the Brits. What do you think we can do this turn?
So for the UK, because the Japanese fleet has been neutralized and our obstacle is getting enough land units from India into Shanghai in the next round in order to hit it and hit it hard, we build 3 transports and a bomber. 3 transports for India, and the bomber going for the UK capital, so we can hopefully do something profitable with it in the last round of the game. We go after Finland because we want to put pressure on Karelia, and we want to distract as many Germans as we can from the Russian capital. And we're at the point in the game where we're willing to sacrifice some air in order to clear out these land units, the ever-diminishing number of land units in Asia. Our goal is to get it to 0 so we can take Shanghai. And so we're going in with bombers and fighters. If we lose them, it's not the end of the world, because we have to take the territory with the land units, and we want to be able to roll in there as unopposed as possible.
So here's how it went. We were successful in taking Finland, which is fun. We were successful in taking Kwangtung. We did lose 1 fighter in that combat, but we took out 4 infantry, so do the math. So in the end, we got the 2 transports and a bunch of infantry for a total loss of 29 IPCs for the Axis, and the Allies only lose 13 this round. That is good news. For non-combat moves, the British Air all decided to spend some time in Sichuan. We start marching units towards the victory cities, and the bomber from Finland landed in Moscow, as did the 3 fighters from India and Persia. So they all landed in Moscow in defense of the capital. We mobilized that bomber over in London and the 3 transports down in India. And in the end, collected 38 IPCs. We saved 5, ending the turn with a total of 43 big IPCs for the UK. How do you think that went?
I think it went good. We accomplished what we wanted to. Getting rid of those 4 infantry was really huge, and bolstering the defense in Russia, absolutely essential, and then killing the transports. That's what we were after. That's why America sacked their fleet. So we had to do all of it. I think it was a great round for Britain.
So at this point, we got the 1-hour call. We had 1 hour and 4 minutes left in the game. And at this point, we all agreed that we should easily be able to make it through another entire round of play, so we can finish round 4 and then play all the way through round 5 before time expires. And so everyone agreed that that's what we would do, which is significant because knowing that the 5th round is your last round changes how you play. So it's just something to keep in mind as we go through this last turn. Know that we left those there or bought that thing because it wasn't going to be relevant to the game.
The only countries whose round 5 purchase is relevant is Russia and then potentially Japan's. The other powers, it really doesn't matter.
Japan's mission here is to try to bolster their 3 victory cities. They can move a couple of fighters around, they can move some land units, but it's all defense at this point for them, which is why they purchased 3 fighters, which makes a perfect sense to me. Of course, they have no combat moves. They're non-combat. This is a really tricky spot for the Japanese. They consolidated as many units as they could get into Shanghai.
Yeah, it leaves Manila as a pretty soft target for the British transports, the American Navy, and really puts all their eggs in one basket in Shanghai.
They mobilized the 3 fighters and collected 28 IPCs, plus the 2 that they had saved, ending J4 with 30 IPCs. They turn it over to the Americans, and as we look across the board at what they have that can actually reach a victory city, we find the 3 transports in 44 with 4 infantry and artillery and a tank, plus the battleship. They don't have any air units that can reach Manila at this point. On US4, they purchased the last 3 bombers.
You always need more bombers with the US, always.
Of course you do. They step forward and take Kwangtung as a combat move and are successful without any trouble.
So there was the potential to hit Manila in this round, but without the bombers there, it would have been pretty narrow. And so to me, let's get the bombers in play. Now that we're staged in Borneo with our bombers, we can hit Manila, Shanghai, or even Tokyo potentially. So to me, that's why this is the right move. Because if we go too early and fail, then we could be in a lot of trouble.
So really what we've set up here is a classic fork. We're forking 2 critical targets and with the potential look at a 3rd. We mobilized the new bombers. The U.S. ends their turn with 42 IPCs. They saved a bunch. IPC losses for round 4. The Axis lost 35. The Allies lost 25. This is a pretty quiet round, actually, in terms of combat in this game. But again, this is the only number that matters. The victory tally at the end of round 4, the Allies only have 6. The Axis have 7. So the Allies need to hold, and they need to take at least 1 in order to win this game. So let's see how it plays out. Round 5 is going to be where they separate the mice from the men. and we decide who's going to win this game. Russia 5, their purchase on their final turn does matter. Defense is the name of the game here. They purchased 8 infantry. Combat moves, they've got one guy that was left in Belarusia that never got picked off, so he just decides to go and take Poland. We also sent the Russian tank from Szechuan to try to take the guy in Manchuria. Now, we couldn't send the fighters because the fighters have got to make it back to Moscow for the defense. If the tank is able to kill the guy and take the territory, that will create a landing space for the American bomber that's in Borneo, if it wants to hit Tokyo.
Yeah, this is what creates the three-way fork and allows America to be able to put pressure on all 3 cities, not just 2 of them.
And we're attacking that German sub. I'm tired of him messing around, screwing around out here. We're going to take him down this time.
Yeah, he's dirty. Get him.
We, of course, step into Poland, no problem, but we missed the guy in Manchuria, and he takes us out. I think that happened in 1 round. I think I rolled and missed, he rolled and hit, and that was the end. It was kind of anticlimactic. I was kind of excited about that particular battle, but it didn't work out. And that dirty dog, he submerged again. Again.
It's really unbelievable.
I don't get it. Russia 5, the only combat losses in that one were the Russian tank that made the run at Manchuria. And so we lose 6, they lose 0. For non-combat moves, we step forward into Kwangtung. I think it's fun that the AA gun has made it all the way to Kwangtung. I don't know why we did that, but we did that. We also marched our infantry from Caucasus up into Moscow because there's no reason to try to hold on to that now. We mobilized our 8 infantry, which gives us a total of 24 infantry in the big stack now in the capital, which is pretty respectable. And now with the UK fighters and the Russian fighters there, we've got 6 fighters on the defense and 3 tanks, plus the AA gun and the UK bomber there for a free hit if it's needed. So the Russian game is really over at this point, other than rolling for defense.
It sure would be nice to have those 5 infantry that were in Yakut and that extra AA gun in capital right now.
Yeah, you're probably right.
It's not for nothing. It's not insignificant, because if you don't protect those American guys, then Japan, when it comes to their turn, can strike out and take them out.
Right, eliminating the third of our 1, 2, 3 punch. So the move is genius, is what I'm telling you. It's genius. I saw it.
The foresight.
I saw it 8 moves ago. I don't know what you're talking about.
8 rounds ago. You saw it in the game before this one.
Of course we did. Germany 5. I think we know what they're going to do. I thought this was weird. He said, I'm going to buy 14 infantry. Okay, cool, whatever. Again, this totally doesn't matter. He decides to take a swing at the guy in Egypt because, you know, why not? They hate the guy in Poland. This guy, he attacked me again. And, of course, here comes the big swing into Moscow. What do they get there with? That's how it adds up. Attacking, they got 3 bombers, 6 fighters, 12 tanks, 1 artillery, and 9 infantry. And on the big D, they have 6 fighters, which is nice, 3 tanks, 24 cans of Russian meat, 1 bomber, and a AA gun. The Germans have a 30% chance of success here. This is not as good as I would like it to be, but we are favored, so I appreciate that much. So we'll see. Let's see what happens.
I think this is another battle where on the surface, when you see that they have 18 threes and 3 4s, it seems like they should be favored almost, you know, just at the first glance. I think it just goes to show that when, okay, they have 15 threes, but when we have 6 4s and 3 3s and so many men to soak hits before they even get to that adds up really quickly.
They were successful in Egypt. They killed the guy. Welcome to Cairo. They killed the guy in Poland. In Moscow, pretty good turnout here. We held Moscow.
Yes.
I know that that's important, but the battle that I really want to tell you about is the one that happened in C-Zone 13. I decided to stay and fight it out this time. So I needed a 1 on the defense, and he needed a 2. We rolled back and forth at each other forever. We rolled for what seemed like longer than we rolled for Moscow. And in the end, they destroyed each other. They sank each other, which I feel like is some metaphor for war here, that there's like no one ever wins in this kind of battle. This was a big, big battle for us. The Axis lose 188 IPCs worth of material. The Allies lose 95, and it holds the Victory City. So that's even more important.
In hindsight, I wish we would have lost one of the Russian infantry units and kept the British bomber.
True, but we got to a point where we only had 4 more land units left. I can see, like, okay, well, I've only got 5 infantry. I don't remember how it all rolled out specifically, but like, okay, well, I've only got 5 infantry left. I think we need to lose this bomber.
Yeah, easy to say on this side of it. when you know the outcome of the particular battle.
Non-combat, not a lot to move around for the Germans anymore. The Germans exist now in 4 spaces on the board. They mobilize in all of their different places. Of course, Karelia is not under any threat at this point. The UK could attack, I suppose. They could attack with 1 tank and several air units, but they'd be running into a stack of infantry, and we saw how that plays out. Germany ends collecting 42 IPCs, which is better than they started with. UK 5, what do you think?
All right, so the United Kingdom has options here. They can go for Shanghai or Manila. They can bring a little bit more to bear on Shanghai, given that their tanks are inland, and they can pick up the infantry units with their transports, bombers, all of that. So we decided to go for Shanghai. We felt like if Britain weakens Shanghai significantly, America can just step in and take it pretty easily. And so it seemed like basically focusing them both on Shanghai was a little bit better than trying to stretch and go for Manila. I think another thing that caused us to go for Shanghai was the amount of fighters that were there, because we thought if the British can blow up all or most of those fighters, it could put us in a pretty good situation for America's turn where there won't be as much defense.
UK's got 3 transports there in 35. They move them over to 36, pick up 3 infantry. They move into 61, pick up the other guys from Yunnan. The tanks can blitz through Kiangsu to make it there. And then they hit Shanghai with everything. What does everything look like? That looks like 5 bombers, a fighter, 2 tanks, and 5 infantry against 3 fighters, 2 tanks, 3 artillery, and 4 infantry. The UK has a 42% chance to take this outright. And that'd be the game. That'd be the game. Because the Germans didn't take Moscow, if the Allies can take just one of these 2 victory cities, they can win the game.
I thought our chances would be a little bit higher than 42, but maybe slightly under 50%.
Here's how it turned out. The UK lost everything, leaving a single Japanese fighter flying over the rubble of Shanghai. Another very expensive battle. The Axis lost 50 IPCs this time, and the Allies lost a whopping 85. But what really matters here is that the UK failed to take that critical victory city, creating a definite opportunity for the Japanese.
It goes back to those 2 fighters in the very first round.
It really kind of does, doesn't it? I mean, because I think that you can trace those guys now to Shanghai and Manila. In non-combat, we moved the UK fighters out of Moscow and into Anhui to protect that American infantry unit. In the end, they collected 36 IPCs, plus the one they saved. It ends the game with 37 IPCs. I will say, this entire game, the UK has made a ton of money.
I couldn't agree more. It gave us the ability to crank out those bombers. Having Africa and these unopposed territories was really, really big for the UK economy.
Moving into Japan 5, their purchase does matter because there is a real threat at Tokyo here. So they purchased 3 additional infantry, but more importantly, they purchased the 2 fighters. They used the fighters that were in Tokyo to take out the transports, and that was the only combat this round. Pick off 21 IPCs worth of allied material, but again, at this point, it doesn't matter much. This is one of those you make the call kind of moments, right? They've got a big threat in the south, and instead of trying to spread out those forces, they landed all of their available air units in Shanghai. They mobilized their new units. They've got 3 more infantry and 2 fighters here, which gives them a total of 7 infantry and 2 fighters in Japan. They end the turn collecting 24. They saved 4. They have 28. So now when we look at the Americans' turn, this is really where the fork comes into play. Unfortunately, the bombers won't be able to be involved if we decided to attack Tokyo, so that kind of takes that one off the board a little bit. So this is everything that the Americans can attack with. They can move with a battleship. They can move with 3 bombers, a tank, and artillery, and 4 infantry. This is not an insignificant force when you see a board that's as thin as this one is. If you're attacking Tokyo, this is what it looks like. Shanghai, you can get into Shanghai, and you have a 93% chance of success in taking Shanghai. But if you look at Manila, you're a 99% chance. So that was the direction we decided to go. We put this up on the board, and I think it was 2 rounds of dice, and we cleared the board. 18 IPCs lost, 6 for the Allies. We put the star on Manila and changed the total. Any thoughts on how that played out?
Obviously, we didn't know exactly 93, 99%. We didn't have those exact figures in front of us for the game itself, but it just seemed like Manila was the obvious choice, even though it didn't really synergize with Britain as far as a 1-2 punch to the same territory, but it synergized with Britain in that Britain cleared that out, kind of forcing their hand to put a bunch of fighters there in Shanghai in order to protect it, making Manila a really soft target. I think this whole situation goes to just showing the strength of the strategy. You get Japan in a situation where they just can't defend all of those victory cities. It's almost impossible. We ultimately didn't have a shot at Tokyo at the end, but we had such good odds on Shanghai and Manila. And these guys played a good game, and we lost a ton of stuff as the Allies. But really, at the end, as much as it was a very good game all the way up, like in one sense, when it came down to this final round, these final battles, maybe Russia with a 70% chance, but with Japan, those battles weren't really even close at the end of the game.
Yeah, I agree. I think we made a couple of minor tactical problems. The fighters coming from Africa, we probably could have put some additional infantry in Moscow. 30% is a little riskier than I want with my capital.
I agree.
But for the most part, I think that we played a pretty good game. And I think you're right. I think the strength of the strategy here kind of bears through. And the idea that strategy beats luck, I think this is a great example of that. We had some really, really tough dice in this game. As we look around the final board state here, again, thank you to Donnie and Ian. We look forward to seeing them again in future tournaments. I think that they are probably deconstructing this strategy right now, working very hard to try to figure out how to beat it. And we look forward to seeing what they come up with and what everybody else comes up with. So if you're out there and you're watching the strategy, how do you beat it? Is there a way that you can see that stops the Thorpe Thump? I don't know. Let's find out. So Doug, thank you so much for being a great partner in Game 3 and for taking the time today to walk us through this incredible game.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the time. Again, shout out to Donnie and Ian. Really, really strong game. I was very scared multiple times throughout this game. It really gave us a run for our money, and it really kind of came down to the wire. So, great game.
We will see you in the live stream, or we will see you for Game 4, the final, stop it, of the World Championship. It's going to be great.
Thanks, Gary. We're in the finals of the World Championship. How awesome is that?
Fantastic. I will tell you what, I'm looking forward to breaking that game down because it is the single closest game of Axis and Allies I have ever heard tale of. So I am super excited to break that game down for everybody. So make sure that you come back for that one. And thank you for watching our walkthrough of the semifinals of the 2023 Axis and Allies World Championship. Before you go, please take a second and hit that like button for us. Maybe drop a comment. When the final match is ready, you'll find it right here. When our next live stream is ready, it'll be here. If you're looking for a playlist for all the videos in this series, this one's for you. And if you're ready to join the now 10,000 strong Board Game Nation, click here to subscribe. My name is Gary Blevins. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.